Darksiders is a cult classic, in the truest sense of the word. It's popular, but not as popular as God of War. It's beloved, but not as beloved as Zelda. It's innovative, but not as innovative as Diablo. It's never quite hit the mainstream like these other franchises have, but in a way, that adds to the franchise charm. Playing through Darksiders, especially for the first time, feels like stumbling across an exclusive secret. Someone will tell you, oh, it's sort of like Devil May Cry with Zelda dungeons. And true enough, that is exactly what the game is. The developers will tell you that themselves. But it's also so much more than that description suggests. The Darksiders games are video games. Unapologetically, enthusiastically, gloriously video games. Darksiders is a real mutt of a game, and that's what I love about it. Some franchises are all about innovation, pushing the medium in bold new directions that have never been done before. And some franchises are just about creating cool video games, and Darksiders is very much the latter. There is no mechanic in Darksiders that you haven't seen in some other game before. There's not a lot of aspects of the story that you haven't seen in other games before. Darksiders is a game built atop other games. But Darksiders is not ashamed of this, it's not trying to pull a fast one. Darksiders is a love letter to the concept of video games. It wears its influences on its sleeve and never pretends to be anything more than what it is. A bunch of nerds coming together to try and make the coolest shit possible by taking all their favourite mechanics from all their favourite games. Darksiders is the debut project of Vigil Games, a studio founded by 4 guys with pretty much that exact mission statement. Make a video game and make it as cool as they can possibly manage. They didn't have some revolutionary concept. In fact, to begin with, they didn't have any concept at all. They just had the ambition and the drive to make the coolest shit possible. I think that's best encapsulated in the name of the franchise. Darksiders. Why is it called Darksiders? It means nothing and has no relevance to anything that happens in any of the games. That's because the name was decided on before the game was. They just picked it from a list of names because it was the one that sounded the coolest and just stuck with it. I love that story because I think that's the heart of the franchise. It is a cool name, and Darksiders is a cool franchise. It's earnest in its coolness. It doesn't care if you think it's cool or not because they think it's cool, and that's what really matters. An entire series built on the back of turning your monitor around so that the guy across from you can say, damn, that's cool.
Since the dawn of time, the armies of heaven and hell have waged an endless war.
Darksiders is the story of war, one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, enforcers of an ancient entity called the Charred Council, whose objective is to maintain balance between heaven and hell. That balance has failed. Angels and demons have descended upon Earth to start their final battle, long before the final battle was supposed to begin. This battle signifies the beginning of the apocalypse, so War finds himself summoned to the scene. But he's alone, the other horsemen are nowhere to be seen, and so he ends up taking the blame for the entire ordeal. It's very strange to hear that the story of Darksiders wasn't decided on until well into production, because one of the things that makes Darksiders so fun is how rich the world building is. Even here in the first game, there's a feeling of depth that permeates everything, as if this game is an adaptation of some long-running comic book series you've never heard of. There are a couple of Darksiders comics, but they were all made in conjunction with the games. Back in 2010, it was a completely fresh IP. Technically, the original source material is the Bible, I guess, but frankly, Darksiders has better world building than the Bible. The 4 horsemen of the Bible are a very weird and abstract concept that pop up for 4 verses and then are never elaborated on again. So it goes for a lot of things in the Bible. Bible scholars don't agree on if they're meant to be a metaphor, symbolic stand-ins for periods of time, or actual supernatural dudes riding horses who usher in the apocalypse. When he opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, "Come," and out came another horse, bright red. Its rider was permitted to take peace from the earth, so that people could slay one another, and he was given a great sword. That paragraph is literally the only thing that the Bible has to say about war, and it's equally as cryptic about the other 3 horsemen. In fact, for the first rider, it's debated what they're even supposed to represent, which is why you'll alternatively hear pestilence or conquest as one of the 4 horsemen, depending on who your source is. Darksiders pulls names, references, and iconography from the Bible, but it is not a biblical game. Instead, it uses the basic ideas to build its own universe and its own cosmology. The 4 horsemen of Darksiders are war, death, fury, and strife, because famine and pestilence are a little too abstract to build an action protagonist around. There is a divine creator, but no messiah. There are angels and demons, but no moral high ground. There is man, but man is pretty insignificant in the grand scheme of creation. After the prologue, war is imprisoned for a century. Humanity is over. Everyone on Earth is long dead, caught in the crossfire of heaven and hell. Earth is now nothing more than a war-torn wasteland. The post-apocalypse is not exactly a unique setting for video games, but most post-apocalypses are rooted in sci-fi, nuclear wastelands or robot uprisings. Darksiders is a fantasy apocalypse, a world torn apart by angels and demons and monsters. Fallout already conquered the post-apocalypse in games, and Diablo is built around perpetual wars between angels and demons, but the angel-demon post-apocalypse is a very cool fusion. The thing that cements it, and the one thing Darksiders can fully claim as its own, is its art. One of the four founders of Vigil was Joe Madureira, more commonly known as Joe Mad, a prolific comic book artist who's done several runs for Marvel with a very unique and expressive art style which he brings in all of its glorious excess to Darksiders. If you told me that Joe Mad first doodled war on his homework when he was 13, I would believe you. Everything in the game just taps into that earnest, teenage, badass aesthetic. Massive armour, asymmetrical design, boots that are bigger than his head, a sword that's almost the size of his entire body. It's all so extra. A reasonable editor probably would have told them to tone it down a little, and yet it works. The design comes together to create something completely unique even in a very saturated market. The whole game benefits from the excess, rejecting realism and leaning into that comic book, heavy metal album cover look to great effect. As with all games that adopt an art style over realism, the game has aged much better than some of its peers. You're seeing the 2016 remaster, but frankly, it's one of the most lackluster remasters I've seen. It doesn't change much. The excess also contributes to that feeling of entering a pre-established world. None of the other Horsemen appear in this game aside from a silhouette in the beginning. But those silhouettes are exactly as the Horsemen will appear when they show up in later games. All three were already fully designed and mapped out. They even appear in the prequel coming to this game almost exactly as they'll appear later in their own games. Apparently, the environmental design was the hardest part, because Joe Mad as an artist is primarily character focused. But where they landed is also excellent, extrapolating the excess of character and monster design to the open world. It's a gothic idea of a post-apocalypse, not any particular city or even a particular country, just ruined streets and buildings arranged in artful desolation. Each zone of the world blends the post-apocalypse with high fantasy. Specifically, each area is tailored to the boss who lives there. A flooded subway repurposed as the lair of a deadly locust monster, an old hospital overtaken by giant spiders, a cathedral that now serves as the castle for a demonic bat. It's not that dissimilar to a regular fantasy setting, except instead of ancient ruins and castles, it's the ancient ruins of petrol stations and public libraries. None of it feels real, the world is blatantly artificial, but it sparks the imagination and creates a game world wholly unique to Darksiders. War is a great anchor for the adventure because he's not human. These ruins don't bother him in the way that they might a human seeing them, which means the game doesn't get too bogged down in mourning the loss of humanity, and focuses much more on hacking up some demons. Darksiders is a hack and slash game, a genre I've never been a huge fan of. You hack, you slash, and you do some button combo abilities for flavour. One interesting critique from the time of its launch is that players either consider Darksiders to be way too easy or way too hard, depending on their background with these sorts of games. As a hack and slash, compared to some of its contemporaries like God of War or Devil May Cry or Bayonetta, Darksiders combat is much simpler and, maybe more importantly, much slower. The four horsemen are designed to be a balanced adventuring party, a holdover from the very early drafts of the game where it was going to be a 4-player co-op game before they quickly realised that they didn't have the time and resources to attempt that yet. Strife is a ranger, Fury is a mage, Death is an assassin, and War is the team tank. He's by far the biggest and by far the slowest of the team. He's not Kratos whirling around the blades of chaos. He has Chaos Eater, a massive sword that he swings like a massive sword, with deliberate purpose. It gives the combat a nice crunchy feeling, but if you're used to the more hectic pace of these other hack and slash games, then it is painfully slow and easy. On the other hand, if Darksiders is your first hack and slash, then the game kinda just throws you into the deep end with very little explanation how this sort of combat works. Something like the lock-on mechanic will get you killed unless you already know from previous games that the lock-on is only to be used against big one-on-one enemies, and is just a hindrance in group fights. But the game doesn't tell you that, that's just general hack and slash knowledge. I personally can manage most of the game without issue, but I'm not sure I'd ever call the combat fun over functional. And despite what you may imagine, that's not a big deal because combat is only one part of the game, and arguably not even the most important part. Some games focus on one mechanic above all else. Most hack and slash games do this. The hacking and the slashing is the priority over everything else in the game. Darksiders opts for a very different strategy. Quantity over quality. Darksiders is a pick and mix of every kind of gameplay from every single one of the developer's favourite games. We have claiming and wall running akin to Prince of Persia, Metroidvania-style level design with areas to unlock later with new abilities, massive Zelda-style interconnected dungeons and puzzle solving, third-person shooter sections like Gears of War, an on-rails flight shooter like Star Fox, and literally just the portal gun from Portal with the same colours and everything. Individually, none of these mechanics are better than the games they're pulling from, games that have a total focus on fleshing out those mechanics, but all together like this, they create a greatest hits roller coaster of game design. Because the portal gun from Portal is a very cool mechanic, and it does lead to very interesting puzzle design, even if it's not quite as complex as the actual Portal games. What unites all of these seemingly disparate gameplay ideas is war, because each gameplay element is flavoured by his unique characteristics. Yes, he's climbing and doing wall runs, but he's no Assassin's Creed parkourist. He climbs angry and with heft. I especially love his gliding animation because it's not a glide, it's a slow falling come at me bro pose. His puzzle solving and platforming involves pushing train cars around. The third-person shooter segments are kind of a wild inclusion, but War is a pragmatist. He doesn't care for showing off, he cares about efficiency, and a big angelic machine gun is a pretty efficient tool for mass slaughter. During combat, and especially after each boss fight, he can perform these big, brutal combat finishers. But what makes War cool isn't his brutality, it's that he's absolutely done with this bullshit. He doesn't relish in causing pain, so these big moves aren't super drawn out. They're designed to be as efficient as possible. 2 swings for the arms, 1 for the head, bish bash bosh, clean and tidy. Although the boss fights are a place where the shallowness of combat really shines through. They all have tremendous designs, the jailer being my favourite. It's just so gross and weird with the cages merged into its monstrous flesh. But every boss fight in the game, with the exception of the very last one, follows the exact same format. Figure out the thing you need to do to stun them and then do a big attack. Repeat 2 more times to win. They prioritise cinematic quality over mechanical depth every time. Which isn't a bad choice, but it means that a boss fight is more of a victory lap than it is a real mechanical challenge. War's general slowness can also get tedious in the exploration. The game waits a surprisingly long amount of time to give you your horse, especially considering you're a horseman, and before that point War has no sprint ability, just his hefty jog to get around the world. The level design is quite good, especially with the way it hides load screens behind doors and connecting areas. A walk from one side of the map to the other will feel pretty seamless, it'll just take you a while. But at least every nook and cranny along the way will have some sort of collectible or upgrade to find. The north of the map is a big desert infested with giant sandworms. You can't kill the worms until you get your horse, which can outrun them, so until then they're a very annoying environmental hazard, brought on by the simple fact that War doesn't know how to run. Or I suppose more accurately, he simply doesn't want to. The man doesn't run from anything. War is a surprisingly likeable protagonist in that way. He's a real blunt instrument of a man. He has very little tact, very little emotion, and no social skills whatsoever. He cares about literally nothing else but his mission. He's voiced wonderfully by Liam O'Brien, who you probably know as one of the Critical Role guys. War isn't very chatty, in fact he never talks outside of cutscenes. But to make up for that, Liam O'Brien bellows every line like it's the most important thing anyone has ever said.
I answer the call. Now free while the destroyer still breathes. You see a great many things from inside a prison, Samael. I did not come for your counsel, Spider, or your stories.
Much like his combat style, War speaks with efficiency. He only talks when he needs to, and he only says things that need to be said. He has no time and no interest in small talk or banter. This blunt instrument quality of War isn't just a character quirk though, it's the root of the entire plot. War has been dragged into the centre of a conspiracy. He obviously didn't start the apocalypse, it was already underway when he arrived. But the Horsemen are only supposed to arrive when the 7 sacred seals are broken. War arrived even though the seals had not been broken, breaking the ancient laws, and thus he takes the fall for everything. The Charred Council is planning to execute him for his crimes, but he manages to persuade them to let him take a suicidal mission back to Earth to uncover the plot and punish those responsible instead. They agree, but they don't send War alone. They bind a sentient creature of shadows to him, the Watcher, to make sure he stays on mission. The Watcher, in classic Darksiders fashion, is a character borrowed pretty much entirely from something the developers thought was cool. They liked Batman the Animated Series, and so they brought in Mark Hamill to just do the Joker. And I'm fine with that, because Mark Hamill doing the Joker is just as fantastic here as it is when he's actually playing the Joker.
Let's lay down a few ground rules. Until this is over, you're a dog on a leash. I say bark, you bark. And if I have to kick you, you'd better not bare your teeth. Understand?
Darksiders doesn't have too many NPCs, but there's a feeling with pretty much every NPC you meet that they know a whole lot more than they're telling you. Like the demon merchant Vulgrim. He's a potential font of information, hampered by the fact that War doesn't give a shit about anything outside of his mission and thus will never ask. But what I like about Darksiders is that while it leaves a bunch of stuff without explanation, there's a strong feeling that there is a solid explanation. These aren't mystery boxes, they're just things the game doesn't feel the need to explain right now. Whether that's true or not, I don't know for sure, but there are things in the prequel comic to the game that hint to story elements not revealed until Darksiders 2, so at least some things were mapped out long before the games get there. Another good example is Ulthane. Ulthane is a maker, a race of ancient giants separate from the angels and demons. His domain is my favourite location in the game, a small patch of greenery amongst the ruins where he's carved out a slice of the old world for himself. He's unlike anyone else in the game, rooted in Celtic imagery and speaking with a thick Scottish accent. And for your mandatory authenticity check, it's one of those regionless Scottish accents that non-Scottish people do, but it's not the worst I've heard. Darksiders only explains the very basics of the makers and their place in the greater cosmology. They usually keep to their own and don't get involved with angels and demons. So Ulthane being here is weird, but other than that it doesn't explain any more than it needs to, since War either already knows or doesn't care to learn some pointless lore. The most important character you meet is Samael, because you spend about 2/3 of the game working for him. War's true target is the Destroyer, who is supposedly responsible for starting the apocalypse early and framing war. But Samael won't help you reach the Destroyer until you collect 4 hearts of the Chosen, which is what leads you to the various dungeons and boss fights that make up the majority of the game. Everything with Samael is set up for a game which doesn't exist yet, build-up that will most likely only finally be resolved in Darksiders 4, which at this point has only just been announced. He's clearly scheming and using War as a tool to his own ends, setting himself up as a power player in the events going forward. But Darksiders 2 and 3 are both sidequels, filling in what the other Horsemen were up to during this game's events. So the actual ongoing story has been on pause for about 15 years now. The plot that's exclusive to Darksiders 1 doesn't get going until you're done dealing with Samael and meet up with the angel Azrael. He reveals that it wasn't the demons who conspired to start the war early, it was the angels, fueled with overconfidence and self-righteousness, particularly the head angel Abaddon, who pushed ahead with the plan assuming they could make it a swift victory. With the help of Ulthane, he broke and then reforged 6 of the 7 seals to summon the demons to Earth, but he didn't break the 7th seal to avoid involving the Horsemen, which is why he was quite so surprised when War showed up anyway. Abaddon appeared to die fighting the demons in the prologue, but in reality he was taken by a mysterious and unseen demon, who offered him a simple choice: serve in heaven or rule in hell. Serving in heaven would mean answering for his crimes, so he chose the latter, and he became the Destroyer. It's all high fantasy, convoluted nonsense, but I love it. Every layer of the conspiracy simply reveals another layer. Abaddon thought he was breaking the rules for his own ambitions, but even he was just a pawn in some greater unseen game. The game taps into the traditional moral binary: angels of light, purity and goodness, demons of darkness, chaos and mayhem, and then expands that really, they're all just as bad as each other. Neither have any care whatsoever for what happens to all the humans that get in the way of their crusade. But angels and demons are also people. Not every demon is evil, neither is every angel. Uriel, Abaddon's former second-in-command, is a good example. She's an antagonist for most of the game, but she is bound by honour and bound by a code, and when she learns the truth about her former lord, she acts accordingly. War is supposed to be an agent of the balance, but what does balance really mean in a scenario like this? War doesn't ask that question. He does not ask for more information. He simply does the work. That's what makes him the perfect fall guy. Death is too smart, Fury is too rebellious, Strife is too empathetic, but War is a good little soldier. It was the Charred Council themselves who sent him to Earth. They knew about Abaddon and the demons' plots the entire time and simply chose to let it happen. Because in case the skulls full of fire weren't a giveaway, they're not actually the good guys. There is a certain kind of Star Wars fan and sometimes Star Wars writer who interpret balancing the Force as meaning that there always has to be a light side and a dark side, a very radical centrist position where good and evil are somehow moral equivalents. But that's the balance that the Council maintain. Good and evil in a constant forever war to stop either side from getting too powerful. War's arc across the game is to learn to question this status quo. Asriel takes him on a little trip to the Tree of Knowledge and the Garden of Eden, as you do, which shows War the truths that he's been avoiding. That Abaddon is the destroyer and that he's being manipulated by the Council. It also shows him his fate. The Watcher will kill him once his mission is over. He shares some of the things he saw, but he keeps that one to himself. This is followed by a bunch of running around to collect the shards of the Armageddon blade that can be used to kill the Destroyer, which may seem tedious, but I think it's a clever bit of level design. This runaround takes you back all over the map, and now that you've gotten all the abilities, you can tidy up all those collectibles you didn't get before. They also throw another surprise boss fight with Uriel at you while you're running about. In the end, it's that fight with Uriel that helps War win. She invokes the right of Nex Sacramentum, the Death Oath, meaning that one is now bound to kill the other. War wins the fight, obviously, but doesn't claim her life, meaning that the sacrament still stands. Later, when War kills the Destroyer, the Watcher immediately tries to kill him, as he foresaw, but War's life now belongs to Uriel. So she stabs him in the back as War laughs, for the first and only time in the entire game. She then breaks the 7th seal, which summons War, reviving him, now free of the Watcher's control. It's such a satisfying moment. The puppet has become the master. Sometimes the only way to fight a scheme is with a scheme of your own. War is no longer a blunt instrument. He sees everything clearly now. And if that clarity means fighting everyone else in the universe, well, that's just how it will be.
You'll never get away. You hear me? Never! Don't forget who holds the leash.
I haven't forgotten.
He also tells Uriel why he spared her. Not just so he could cheat death, but because she's honourable. A rare trait in this world. But if there's to be anything after this apocalypse, then it needs people like her. People who do not scheme. People who stay true to their convictions. It's said that a better world will emerge after the death of the old one. So maybe a horseman's job isn't just to bring the apocalypse. Maybe it's to help build what comes after as well. But War doesn't have to do it alone. After all, breaking the 7th seal doesn't just summon one horseman. It's one of the best sequel teases of all time. The story has momentum, it has clear direction, it has obvious potential for both mechanical and narrative expansion. In the end, for as fun and interesting as Darksiders is, it's also so clearly the prologue chapter of a much bigger story. The four horsemen against the world. This is why for a lot of people, the fact that this cliffhanger is still open is very annoying. People were expecting that the next game would immediately follow up on where this game stopped, but it didn't. It went backwards instead. But to me, each subsequent game has only made this ending more exciting. It's one thing to see those coloured meteors coming down to join War, but each game adds context and depth to each of those meteors. Each subsequent game adds more and more to the tangle to be unravelled in Darksiders 4. This ending doesn't degrade the longer it's put off, it gets even more exciting because no matter how far the next few games stray, they're all building up to this moment. When Darksiders 4 was finally announced, the audio from this final scene was all they needed to get people excited all over again. I understand why Darksiders has never quite made it to iconic status like some of its peers. I would be happy if it did, I'm sure we'd have a very cool anime by now, but I understand why it didn't. Coolness is arbitrary. Darksiders is cool, but not everybody's going to feel that way about it. It's an inherently niche product, or at least as niche as the AAA industry will allow. But it's a great story. A whole studio and a whole franchise built on the back of nothing more than the honest desire to make something cool. Even if the game had been a commercial failure, that would still be a cool story. So maybe it's not a revolutionary masterpiece, maybe it did not change the gaming landscape in some dramatic way. So what? Sometimes we all just want to play a cool video game.
You will be hunted. The White City for certain. The Council, and there will be others. You would wage this war alone?
No. Not alone.
Thank you for watching, and a very special thank you to my wonderful patrons for your continued support. If you'd like to see your name up here, or just support the work that I do, then please consider signing up, it would mean a lot to me. As well as a like, comment, share, subscribe, and ring the bell. To see my previous series critiques, you can either click up here for this massive video on all the Borderlands games, or down here is a playlist on every single Assassin's Creed game. And now I think, it's time for death.